All right, I'm going to start recording, and it is recording now. So I know that some of you are having to pull various duties at school, and you are doing it by phone and you can't do it by video, but if you are able to turn your video on, please feel free to do that. First of all, do you have any questions about any of the assignments or anything that I have said, any comments I've made when I have reviewed your tasks? Okay, Amy?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I had a question about feedback. So when you give us feedback and we make the changes, do we resubmit it, or is it,
No.
do you automatically see it?
No, you do not have to resubmit it because you're teachers. So if you're given feedback, you're expected to follow through with it. The next time you submit it will be when you turn it into the assignment Dropbox and you've made all the revisions, my revisions and whatever Dr. Bullis has suggested, and if your peer reviewers have found anything that you incorporate all of those and then you revise it. So that you brought up a good point. Let me review again exactly where things are supposed to be turned in and when you turn them in. First thing that you do with your draft of your task, your rough draft of the task, you put it on discussion board. That is where I get to see it, and that's also where your peer reviewers will see it. Now, Dr. Bullis has a class shell that he will have you submit for him to review it. He can't see it from my class shell, and I can't see what you submit to him. But you take the information from both of us, and then you make your revisions, and then the second time that you revise it, or after your revisions, you put it in assignment Dropbox, and you put it for task 1. And then you just, once you've got your revised task, you just leave it sitting there until you get ready to put the whole thing together. So that's what, that's the way, just to give you a quick review of how we do it. Now, I wanted to go over some of the comments that and things that I saw consistently. It wasn't just in one paper, it was in several papers. All right, the question is, can Dr. Bullis get it from my shell? No, he cannot get it from my shell. It has to be submitted to him in his shell for him to be able to see it. That's a really good question. What I would like for you to do, and remember the way I teach this is I suggest you do things to make it easy on the evaluator so that there's not going to be any questions and the evaluator can find everything easily. So I would like for you to have your cover page. On a new page would be where your school profile is, and you label it school profile. You're not trying to hide anything from anyone. And then when you start task 1, if you're going to include an introduction, still put at the top of a new page, task 1, and whatever that task is called. First one is professional learning communities. Then you can put your introduction followed by the 3 different components with your subheadings. That is just simply to make it very easy for your evaluators to find. The other thing is, I want you to think about this in case you ever decide to get your doctorate. This is getting you mentally prepared for how you put together a dissertation. Think of your school profile is something similar to just telling what an abstract. Then you can have a table of contents if you want to tell what pages everything's in or on. Think of task 1 is like a little chapter. If you were writing a book, and think about the books you read, the second chapter doesn't start on the same page as the first chapter ends. It goes to a new page. It makes it look more professional. It makes it look good. They can find the beginnings and the endings real quick. So please do that. I know when you look at the example, it sort of all runs together, but it just makes it look really professional when you make those clean stops and starts. So if you will do that, I think that would be very helpful. Another thing that I found is that several of you are more than double spacing between your narrative and your subheadings. If I'm not mistaken, APA wants you to double space the entire paper, unless you're doing something where you're citing a reference, or you've got something that you're copying, then you do it the way that they say to do it, which is not the double space. But if it's your own narrative, and then you need to double space, and then between the narrative and your subheading is still just double spaced. So just remember that. Anything that you put in a chart or a figure or a graph, APA tells you how to label it. You have to give it a number, and you call it figure 1 or whatever, and then you label it. What is it that you're trying to show? And if it's a graph, you tell what each one of the axes are representing. So you want it to be very easy to understand. Your references, again, should begin on a separate page at the end of the paper. And that way, when you get ready to put them all together, you're just lifting from one part, and then you're meshing them together in alphabetical order. Paragraphs should be indented from 5 to 7 spaces. Some of them, I know what you're doing. You're getting in a hurry and you're double clicking for your indentation, and you're getting sometimes 10 to 14, and sometimes you're tapping the space bar 2 to 3 times and it's not really indenting much. So just be cautious about that. And I already mentioned the introductions that can go with the task prior to you getting into the subheadings, or you can even put a subheading introduction. Please check your grammar. Make sure your subject and verb agrees. If it's singular, it should be, if the subject is singular, the verb should be singular. And if the subject is plural, the verb should be plural. And I'm finding some of you are using phrases, and it happens when you use a word that ends in ing, that's sort of an introduction to what you're trying to say. And for some reason, that's causing you just to use a phrase and not have a whole subject and verb. So make sure you pay attention to how you are writing things, and please use complete sentences, not just phrases. One thing you need to think about, what goes in the task, and the reason we spend so much time on it, going over it and over it and over it, and the reason you revise it and we keep telling you what we would like it to look like is, that they are going to be looking at this from DPI possibly. This goes into your task stream account. And the purpose of all of this, and it's nothing for you to get worried about because it's not going to come back on you, but it will come back on the university. The university has to be approved each year, or I think it's every 5 years, for their program that they're offering through DPI. And DPI can come in and say, well, this is what you said you were doing. And they can say, I want to see the 5th person in 603 fall semester of such and such. And they could go in and look at the work that you completed and put in task stream. They're not looking at it for what you've done. We're doing that. But they're doing it to make sure that Gardner-Webb does what they're supposed to be doing and what they said they were doing. So that's why you want it to look really good, and you want it to be your professional work. And think about it as writing an English research paper. For task...
Dr. Todd, I have a question about that. So a lot of what you're speaking about is the grammar and the APA. And then earlier on in one of the meetings, you mentioned you being an evaluator. And basically, once whatever we put in front of you that comes back, theoretically, if we submit that into the Dropbox, that we should be on the right track working towards those 3s or above. So who is supposed to catch the APA mistakes? Our peer groups, you, I mean,
All of us, we're all looking.
all of us. Okay.
We're all looking for it because I won't catch everything, and
So
you
the
won't
drop,
catch everything.
so when we submit it in Dropbox, that theoretically isn't our final before we go into task stream later on. Does that make sense?
Okay, it is close to your final, but if I still see mistakes, or if Dr. Bullis sees them when you get ready to submit for him, then we can still tell you, you can still fix it before you put the whole thing together.
Okay.
That
Okay.
makes
Thank you. It does. Thank you.
Okay. The other thing is, don't forget to have some type of evidence for your task 1 meeting. Now that evidence can be a picture, it can be your agenda, it can be your minutes. If you videotaped it, it can be a videotape. You do not have to put it in your narrative. You can put it as an appendix at the back of the paper. But if you do that, you need to, in your narrative, write a paragraph and say, the meeting that we had, the agenda and the minutes of that meeting are in Appendix A and whatever it is named, okay? So that is where your evidence can come in. And then make sure you check the APA manual to see how the appendices are to be labeled. Now, do you have any questions about anything I have said? Anybody have any questions? All right, Megan?
Okay, you're saying submit to Dr. Bullis, but I'm not in Dr. Bullis's shell. I'm in Dr. Lamb's shell. Does that matter? Should I still submit it somehow?
Okay, if you're supposed to be in Dr. Bullis's. If you're in this class, you're supposed to be in Dr. Bullis's. So,
How do we go up?
okay.
We'll discuss that later and work on making that change then, I guess.
I'll just, since I know that, is anybody else in a different shell with a different internship shell? Have you been Jonathan, who are you with?
Just you. I only see your shell. I don't see Dr. Bullis or Dr. Lamb.
Okay. All right. So you have no clinical coach too.
Yep.
All right. And Megan, you are with Dr. Lamb?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Has he been meeting with you?
Not at all.
He hasn't been sending you invitations or anything? All right.
No.
Anybody else in that situation? I need to get you added to Dr. Bullis's. Sarah?
I actually am in 2. I'm in Dr. Bullis's, but I'm also in Sumner's.
All right. So, okay. Is Sumner your CC1?
No, ma'am. My CC1 is not. Is Zion's.
Okay. All right. So you don't need to be in Sumner's.
No, ma'am.
All right. All right. I will send Dr. Lamb this and get him to see if he can get it straightened out. But you should, all of you that are in this section with me should be with Dr. Bullis as well, because they were supposed to pair the CC2. So I'll get that information. So thank you very much for sharing that. And anytime you run across things like that, please let me know. I don't know about it if you don't let me know. So, all right, anything else about anything I've said so far? So Dina, you have 2 as well.
Dr. Todd.
Oh, Deanna, I'm sorry. Yes.
I am showing in Dr. Bullis and Dr. Lamb, and then also for I have like 2 internship things, so it's like Dr. Bullis, Dr. Lamb, and then the second one is Dr. Bullis and Sumner.
Okay. I don't know what's going on. What yours shows up administration main. So what's your name?
Crystal Caps.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. All right. I'll check on that too. So I need to check on Kayla. So, okay. I do not know what is going on. So it looks like over half of you are assigned to 2 different ones, and that doesn't make a bit of sense. So I will send him a message. I've got Crystal, Kayla, Megan, Jonathan, Deanna and Sarah, all with some similar issues, and Amanda as well, and Jenny. Now, sometimes Dr. Lamb will put his name on the same class with me and with Dr. Bullis. So it is possible if you've got Dr. Lamb's, there's not an issue. But if you've got Bullis and Sumner, I think there's an issue. Okay? So I will send an email to Dr. Lamb and see if I can get it straightened out. All right, anything else before we proceed on? Okay, I think I got all of the notes that you sent. So, okay, anything else? All right, I wanted to just, what you've been talking about and what you're getting ready to go into with task 2 is you're going to identify a problem. And then you're going to figure out how to fix that. Well, how do you know how to fix that? So what I tried to do is pull out some of the ideas that are mentioned in your textbook in chapters 2 and 7. Some of these, if you went through some of the early training in making sure schools are teaching all children, then you've heard many of these. And some of these you've heard again in different, they just relabel sometimes. But the effective schools research that came out when all of the student orientation and trying to make sure all students learned, that research started out with time on task and spent a whole lot of time pointing out that when students are in your care, you should be on task with them, and that you get your procedures, your administrative procedures, you get those very quickly so you're not wasting time. You're dealing with teaching materials in some way, form, or fashion the whole time. So that is not a new strategy, but it's still a good one. So one of the things that I mentioned, I just went through and found several different practices. Some are more appropriate for the entire school, some are appropriate for classrooms. But if your school is going to improve and you're the administrator in a school, it's going to be dependent on you as the administrator to try to get everybody moving in the same direction. Now, the larger group that you have to get to move in the same direction, the harder it is. And so, you know, a big high school is going to be much harder to move in the same direction than a smaller elementary school. But you've got to know some of the best ways for classroom instruction as well as what you need to do and model to try to get your teachers to work together well. And you know that obviously professional learning communities is one of the pieces that's important. But at the same time, if they're not done correctly and if they're not focused on student achievement and they're not focused on collaboration and they turn into a gossip session, they're not worth the time that you're spending in them. So you have to make sure that you're doing things the right way. So I mentioned several, and I want you to look at the various ones. Teacher collaboration, using cooperative learning as a strategy, using your existing formative and summative data and grouping the students for instruction and regrouping them throughout the day, and using learning styles information when you're planning classroom instruction, high expectations for student success, retention of students, differentiated instruction, problems-based learning and time on task, and response to intervention and individual education plans. And so the question I ask you is, which do you feel will help your schools improve the most and why? And I'm going to put the list on a shared screen. Hopefully it will come up correctly. So as you look at this list of practices, some for the classroom, some for the whole school as a unit to be working on, which do you think that the school you're currently working in is doing the best job of, and you think that it's really making your school improve? Now, many of you, after reading your papers, I know that many of you are working in schools that are very high functioning. So when you're working in a high functioning school, the issue becomes how do you keep them there? Because it's really hard to do that. But some of you are in schools that need improvement. So which ones of these do you think your schools are doing the best job and will help your schools improve the most? And don't all of you answer at once. All right, who wants to go first? There's not a right or wrong answer. Just share something about your school and of these ideas, what you feel that you are on the right track with and what you think will help the most. All right, Megan, thanks for volunteering to go ahead. Okay, I need you to turn there.
There we go. I can't find the button. I'm sorry. The pressure.
Oh, I did the same thing, so don't worry about it.
I think our school does a really great job with our IEPs. We've got a really high population of kids with 504s and kids with exceptional challenges. It's a high poverty school, but we do a really great job of holding high expectations for all the kids. I mean, we have kids who come in off of a friend's couch or out of foster homes or group homes or, they've got horrible circumstances, but we still hold them to high expectations when they're in the building. They can still learn and grow and improve themselves regardless of their circumstances. So my school does a great job of that.
Good. All right, what about some of the rest? All right, Jeannie?
Our school is really taking a focus on differentiated instruction this year. One of our school improvement goals is that all teachers will show documentation that they've used this at least once in their classroom, either from a summative evaluation or by administrative walkthroughs. So it's kind of our main focus this year is to bring in the differentiated piece of that for all students. So not just the low ones that might need special remediation, but how do we grow our higher ones as well? How do we get them the special attention that they need and that everybody gets exactly what they want? So our school is really taking the time. The majority of our professional development is focused on differentiated learning and how we can meet the needs of all of our students instead of just a select few. Because in the past, we've had our focus on just our IEP kids versus we need to make sure we're growing everybody as well.
Well, and often you hit a really important point. Often the ones that are not making the growth is your really good kids. For years, the AIG kids have not been making the growth that they need to make. They're at the top. They're making their fours. They're pulling the fours in for your school, but they're not improving in the growth. So you're right. You've got to move them all. Now, anybody else? Deanna says she believes her school does best at using existing summative informative assessment and differentiated instruction, and she thinks it helps with the subgroups of exceptional children and ELL a lot. And she said they really try to help all students be accountable and provide equal opportunity for all. Now, since I've got this screen shared, if you all want to just jump in, I have to go back and forth in order to see who's volunteering. So what about some others of you? We'll spend about 2 or 3 more minutes on this, and then I want to get to the case study. Anybody else have anything to add? Or something you think your school is doing really well? All right, Amy?
We're focusing more on teacher collaboration. It's just hard with having enough time to be able to do that, but and with the PLC, it's working out great so that we can have discussions and see whose strengths and weaknesses, see who has just some other ideas. And then our principal's really good at trying to help with time on task, with taking away from anything where the kids are going to be out of the room to give us time for instruction and really just keep them, keep everybody on task, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I used to have a superintendent. I was still in the classroom when the time on task was being really stressed, and he would make the comment, the teacher is in charge from the time the student walks in. It is not bell to bell. The teacher should be ready to teach when the first bell rings, and if you're in high school and the bell rings, the teacher should be the one letting the students go. They don't need to be standing up at the door waiting for the bell to ring. And so when he would walk through our building, he would be looking to see if we were actively involved with our students. So time on task is really important. And you know, one of the things that kills time is taking roll. And you come up with quick ways to take a roll so that you're not wasting time doing that. So just spending every minute teaching and working with their students is one of the ways to make sure that you try to get enough time that your children can actually gain the concept and do what they need to do. All right, anybody else have anything you would like to share? Anybody else? All right, let's go to, I want you to look in your textbook on page 362. And real quickly, that is about a situation with a principal, and he's been given money for budget. And it says, you're conducting a review, you're the principal, and you're conducting a review of your school's science program, and you learn the following. Students from your unit do not do well on the SAT or similar tests, and they complain about not being able to get into the prestigious colleges and universities. Enrollment in advanced science classes have been dropping steadily over the last 5 years. Many of your science teachers didn't major in science. It's their second field. Some members of the community have been begging for a better science program. The superintendent of schools and the deputy in the district's division of instruction have mounted an effort to persuade the Board of Education that additional resources are needed to expand the reading program. Principals in your district have latitude in the development and implementation of the instructional budget. The amount of your instructional budget is determined by your basic allotment plus a factor which is largely a result of the average daily attendance the previous year. There's a lot of jealousy among your departments about how the money is going to be spent, and there's a change in attendance zone boundaries that's recently occurred. And this has caused your school to have a 15% increase in students from homes where English is a second language. There is no increase in the budget for next year. Your average daily attendance is about the same from year to year. So you have the community begging for science. You have the superintendent and the deputy superintendent who's saying we have got to have more resources for reading. So you have your teachers that are jealous of each other in the departments, and everybody has some needs. So how are you going to solve this and come up with a budget that's palatable and everybody's not going to be mad at you that whole year?
I don't know. I feel like first and foremost, we need to look at those ELs that are coming in. If your population's growing by 15%, you got to meet the needs of the kids who are there. And then I have absolutely no idea. So what comes after that?
All right. Well, first you've got a good place to start. You've got to look at the population coming in and how that's going to change the overall achievement of your school. So what's something else that someone else would add that you need to be looking at?
I don't know if this is right, but would you like prioritize maybe based on the needs of the students on what subject? Like if they need more resources in reading, because reading is the foundation for everything versus the science, and maybe put together a different like parental community, learning or community to like put fundraisers out to, you know, to get some of that stuff for the science. You know, like at our school, our math is really, really, really low. So that's where our focus has been. I mean, we still focus on reading and science as their EOG tested, but math is really our focus. Because that's, you know, we like, I mean, school report card is based on partly math. So that's where our need is in math. And so maybe I would just prioritize that. I don't know.
Oh, you're exactly right. And one of the things that you mentioned, you would need to pull out your data and you'd need to look at anything that's tested. And then you'd look at the long range results and what students are signing up for. We noticed, and this is a sad commentary, I think, and I'm not exactly sure why it's happened, but back when I was in high school, if you were going to college, you took chemistry and physics and advanced biology. You took all three of those and you didn't deviate. Well, we don't have, when I was superintendent, we did not have enough kids who would sign up that we could offer physics, but every other year. Now, the student enrollment has increased from when I was there. So that didn't make sense to me. So there is something going on in the school system that I worked with the parents not wanting their children to have to be challenged, I think. I think that's what's going on. They wanted them to have an A, and they wanted them to enjoy their high school more so than they were concerned about them being challenged and forced to work. Now, I may be 100% wrong in that, but for us to all just be taking the advanced courses when I came through, and then now you cannot even get enough, and the population has increased to offer physics, but once every 2 years, there's some disconnect there, and there has to be something going on because the school is not the ones not pushing it. The school is wanting to offer it, and we have teachers prepared to offer it, but that's happening. And you probably can find similar things like that going on in lots of different places. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about is how can you use the fact that the superintendent and the deputy superintendent are trying to get extra money for reading? How can you use that to help your science program?
Well, I mean, reading and science can kind of go together. You can use science articles and science textbooks to teach reading strategies.
And you can, and if they want you to buy some books of interest for children, you can buy some books that have an interest in science and that deal with science applications and those kind of things. So, you know, when money says it's for a particular thing, unless they tell you exactly how every dollar is going to be spent, you can move those resources and kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. So you can use the money that comes to you for what your teachers feel is needed and to improve the science part. Now, when you heard or when you look at that, there's so many competing things going on here. If you were the principal, what would you think was the two things you really needed to focus on for this school? Kayla, do you have something that you're trying to say? If you are, we can't hear you. Okay.
I was just trying to send small children to bed.
Oh, okay. All right. No problem. All right. Anybody? What do you think the two real issues with this particular school are, or what would you say the biggest are?
I feel like the fact that the teachers that are in the science department aren't high quality teachers. So maybe making sure that they get the training that they need to be able to meet the needs of the students might be a really good place to start, or bringing in some resources there.
Right. Bring in some staff development. That would,
Mhm.
and then maybe if they were better trained, more students would take it. Not
For sure.
necessarily, but maybe they would. You would hope that they would. And then reading is going to be one of those things that's going to help everybody regardless. At least I feel that way. If their reading improves, then their understanding of the science concepts are going to improve, but you can get the benefit of that by using your resources to buy some books that relate to science activities. One of the ways that you can do this, especially the part about the competitive nature and the jealousy section, is I always did my budget with a committee. I didn't do it by myself. And I was in a pre-K through 8th grade school. So I would get a representative that the teachers chose for pre-K through 2, another one for 3 through 5, a one for 6 through 8, and one to represent the itinerant people. And then I would have the media person on there. So there would be 5 in our committee when I would get the money that was allotted to our school. And the teacher that represented those groups had the needs from all of the various teachers. So when we would sit down, they would see how little money we got. And I was in a relatively small school, so it wasn't a lot of money. So what we would do, one year it might be that the 6th grade needed a set of novels. Well, we would buy those novels that year, but the next year we might buy something for the 7th grade. So we would have to, and we kept our list of what they needed, and we would move from one grade level to the next grade level, and they would wind up making sure that we got the resources that they needed at least every 3 years. And when we had more money come in, if we ever did, which wasn't very often, then we would go back and say, okay, this is what's next on the list, and this is what's next on the list. So everybody needs a lot of things. And especially, I think it's getting worse than it used to be, because I think the part that's being cut a lot is instructional materials and supply money. So there's probably not as much coming to your schools as is really needed. So what you have to do is work together as the entire school, and you have to collaborate, and you use your data to figure out exactly what your needs are and what's going to help your school the most. So that's just an idea. You know, don't make yourself, when you're the principal, as the guardian of the money. Share that. Let your teachers know how little you're getting. And then they'll help understand and share with the rest of the group. You know, you can't sit down in a faculty meeting and do this because everybody's going to have a different opinion. But you can have a small group representing everybody that can meet with you, and you can talk about, okay, we need this. And then the various levels can talk about, okay, how can we make this money go as far as possible? So there's a lot of different ways to do things, but you don't have to be the one that is always going to get talked about because of what you do. Now, I do know that there are a lot of principals that don't share their budgets with their teachers. And I have never understood why they don't do that, because I was taught that this is the way you do this back in the early 90s. So it's not a new concept. It is a concept that has been around for a very long time, and I have done that. So I don't understand, unless they don't understand the budget, and most of the money and the things are sent to them from their central office. That's the only thing I can figure out. But you know, each principal has a different personality, just like each one of you has a different personality. And so sometimes people do things differently. But I always found it was in my best interest for my teachers to understand how little money we got and how we spent that money. I have Amanda says literacy strategies, going back to looking at the things to improve the school. And Deanna says, I think you need to really focus on what you can control. Maybe do a boot camp to help the students with the SAT, extra training for science teachers. Some of these are almost out of the control of the principal. And that is an extremely good point. And I want all of you to think about that. There's so many things out of your control that you really have no point in worrying about them. You do the best that you can with what you have and try to help improve. And the nature is improving. Not necessarily that you're going to be the top school in the county, but that your school's improving. And if you don't have any control over it, then that needs to go on the back burner and you work on the things you can control. What are some of the things the principal can do to try to get his faculty on board with funding decisions that are made at the school? I mentioned an idea of a committee. What are some other things that can be done? Amy, did I see you raise your hand, or was it somebody else?
Yes, ma'am. Well, ours is through a committee. It's through the school improvement team. So we, it goes back to the teachers and their needs, and then they come up with a wish list, and then we just go through it that way. Like, it's just prioritized. And then from our fundraisers, we take that money, because we're not Title I, and we just knock off the list with what instructional supplies we need that we don't have, that, we're not receiving otherwise, that we have to purchase.
Okay. And that works too. That's good. And the school improvement team can be the group. I don't know what I called my group, but we were just I think I called them budget committee, but it could have easily been the school improvement team. All right. Any other comments? Because I promised you it'd be short, and we're just about out of time. I want to remind you of the assignments for this week. And just also remember to use the side and look at the week, because I try to make sure, not all professors do, but I try to make sure that I list the assignments for that week and have to either tell you where it goes, or I put it, attach it to, link it to discussion board. So you have your draft of task 2 that you're working on. If you've been able to finish your revisions of task 1, then you place that in assignment Dropbox for that task. If you've not got all your revisions, hold off until you get them. You do have 2 peer reviews that you have completed on your group members that are posted to peer review Dropbox. And what I want to see, I want to see the 2 peer reviews that you do on your teammates. That way I will see them all, but I want to see the 2 you do. And then your Zoom group procedures from your first small group Zoom meeting. All right, does anyone else have a question? Because we're just about out of time. Anybody have a question? Well, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and I will soon stop recording. Okay, the first question is, do we need to record the Zoom meetings? Yes, you will need to record that. And when you get ready to turn that information in, if you will put who is in your Zoom group, and then send me the link. And that way I'll get all 5 of you that's in the group and give you a grade. Okay? So whoever is recording it, whoever acts as the Zoom master for the first one will be the one to record it. And then you will need to convert it. It will convert, and then you upload it after it's converted on Zoom to YouTube. And then that's where I'll get the link from. Okay? Any other questions? And the reason I suggest that you do this one and take this one is so you get practice for the one that you are supposed to do for the class. Because sometimes it doesn't quite go the way it's supposed to. And sometimes you don't get it recorded and it doesn't convert right. So it's always good to get one out of the way. So that's the reason I suggest doing this. Okay? If something happens, write me a narrative and tell me what the different people did in your meeting, or each one of you can write a narrative and tell what you did in your meeting. All right, any other questions for tonight or comments? All right, we'll be back on schedule for Tuesday night next week at 7 o'clock. Have a great rest of the week. Good night.